Hi everyone, hope that you all are doing well. Today we'll code an example of the easiest way and with the limited code to design user register and login with security. But before we jump into the video's context, I would like to request you, if you find my videos knowledgeable, please do like, share and comment on the videos, and if new to the channel, please subscribe and press the bell icon. So let's get started. We'll directly jump on to developing the project, as we have done it many a times, but today we'll be discussing the easiest way, and today we'll be discussing with the minimum code that you can write and you can design your login and registration. So let's go on the file and let's generate a new project. We need to generate a Spring Starter project, so let me select Spring Starter project. Let me name this project as register and login with secure. So my package name is code with Raman.implementation. Java version is 21, right? So let's go next and let's add the dependency. So for the basic application, first of all, as we are making a controllers call in with the database and we are running it on a Tomcat server, we need a Spring Web dependency. That is the basic dependency that we require. Then we will be requiring a database that we'll be connecting with. So I'm connecting with mysql database, so I need mysql driver. We'll be connecting mysql in the way of JPA, so I also need the JPA dependency. So let me select the JPA dependency as well. Then along with that, we are showing UI form of login and registration. We need the theme leaf dependency for that, and a basic security that has been required on an application, so we need Spring Security. So these are the dependencies that I require in my project. Let me finish and let me import the project. So my project is ready, it is imported. So this is my project. So let's go to the pom.xml and let's see the dependencies that we have added. So these are the dependencies. Our Spring version was 3.3.4, right, and the Java version was 21. So we have the dependencies of so this is my Java version 21. Then we have JPA dependency, security, theme leaf, and web dependency, right? So these were the dependencies that we require, and the MySQL connector. We would have a MySQL connector dependency as well, right? So now let's start by creating packages. I'll tell you that what minimum packages that you require for your application. First, let's design the packages and then we'll design the class. So my first package would be .model, right? We need an entity that will be interacting with the database, the data that we'll be storing into a database. So we need an entity, and that will be in the model pack. Then we need as we'll be interacting with the database, so we need a repository. We need a repository to get to interact with the database, where we'll be designing our JPA class. Then we require a service package, wherein a service would be defined, be it a user service that will be registering the data into a database by interacting with the database, and the other one would be user detail service that will be helping us into creating a user detail object to help us log in through security. And then we need a package of, right, so we need a package of config, where our Spring Security config would be written, and then we need a package of controller, right? These are the packages that we require in our project. So this is the basic structure of the project if you are building a login registration application in a simple way and with less of complex. So there is a very much scope of extension of the code, right? So now let's start by creating a model class. So as we are dealing with the login, so let me create a class called as user, right? So let me create a class called as user. In the user class, first thing that we need to mark this class as entity, right? So we'll be interacting with the database, so we need to mark this as a class entity. So let me get the entity, and also we need a table for this class, so we'll mark @table as well. Now the first thing that we need a primary key, so let me say private, and like I'll say long id, right? And to mark this as a primary key, we need a dependency called as id @id, annotation @id, and then we need the type of value that would be generated. So we need the generated value, right? And in the generated value, we'll be passing the strategy, right? The strategy would be generation type dot auto, right? So this is my strategy of generating the id. Then as this is a very small example we are taking, so I'll restrict my code to a very simple fields. So I'll take like string username. In the username, I am expecting the user to input the email ID, right? Then we have the password, right? have given wrongly. Then we need a I'm keeping it right now, but in our example I'll be setting it as default. I am taking string as role, right? Role for the user, right? So these are the fields that I require in my model class, and let me generate the getters and setters for these fields. So let me go into source and let me say generate getters and setters, and let's see, select all, and let's say generate, right? So our class is complete, right? Our model class is complete. Now what we have to do is we have to write a repository, right? So how you can do it, you can go to the repository, you have to generate an interface, right? And you can name it as user repository, and your user repository can have the extends to JPA repository, right? So in the JPA repository you have to pass the object you want to create, so it's the user object of the packages that you have created, and then you have to pass the primary key type that you have taken. So in my case it was long, so I have taken long. So this is my repository complete, right? So to mark this as a bean for Spring, we have to mark this as @repository, so that the creation, generation and everything is being taken care by Spring. So it acts as a Spring bean now. So we have the repository, right? Now we need a layer between the controller and the repository. So we need the service class. So first let me create a class. Let's say it as user service, and first thing I have to mark this as service, make it a bean of Spring, right? Now in this class basically I'll be interacting with the repository and I'll be storing the data into my database, right? So first thing first, what I require here is that I need to have a I'll be requiring a repository object, right? So let me define a repository object, private user repository, right? User repository, right? And also I need a password encoder, right? So as my password would be encoded before saving into the database, so I'll say password encoder, right? And I'll say password encoder, right? And I need to define my constructor of the user service. So I'll say user service, and I just need an object of user repository to get initialized with my constructor. So I'll say user repository, right? And I'll pass this dot user repository equals user repository, right? So now I have the object of user repository, I have the object of password encoder. What I need to do is I need to just define a method to register a user, right? Register user. Here I am expecting, as this is a small example, I am expecting to the controller would be passing me a username and a password, right? So a username and password would be supplied by the controller to this method, and this method would be creating an object of user, right? User equals new user, right? And then we just need to set the username as username, and for the password, user.set password, we have to use the encoder. So let me say password encoder dot encode, and then in between that I'll pass my password. So now my password would be encoded and then saved to the database, right? And then I need to store the user role as well. So I have taken a field called as role, and by default I'll take user role as user, right? And then using the user repository, I'll call the save method and I'll pass my user object, right? So now with this method my data would be stored into a database, that is data would be created into my database with the username and the password, and the password would be encoded into the database, right? So this was my user repository. So let me save this. But before we go ahead, to to avoid the circular dependency, I should take this as a final, and I should mark this as auto wired, right? I should mark this as auto wired and this as final. So this is my user service, which is helping us to save the data to our database, right? Now, as I said that we also need a user details object. So let me create another class that will be called as custom user details. Right now, this custom user details would be basically implementing user details, right? User detail service. So there would be an overridden method that we have to add, that is load user by username. So basically what we'll be doing here is we'll be getting a user object by the username. So let me say user equals I need a user repository here as well, right? So first let me mark this as a service so that Spring identifies it as a bean, right? So now first of all we need a user repository object, right? So let me say private user repository, and let's say user repository, and I'll pass it, I'll do the constructor injection, right? So let me say custom user details, and I'll pass a user repository object here, and I'll say this dot user repository equals user repository, right? So this is how I'm doing the constructor injection. Now I need to find the user from the database through the username, right? So I'll say user repository dot find by username, right? And I'll pass the username. So I have to create this method into our repository. So let me first create this method. So this method is being created. Why it is saying a user object? It needs to return a user. Yes, a user of type my type. Yes. So we need a user, right? And I haven't imported the user, so yes. So now I'll have a user object, right? So first what I have to check is I have to check if this user object is not null, right? If this user object is not null, if it is null, so what we are doing is we are throw new user not found exception, right? And with that I'll pass a message user not found with given username, right? And if the user is found, what we have to do is we have to simply return, right? We have to simply return a user object of user details, right? So this object we have to return user object, and with that we have to pass, like, let me remove this return statement, and I'll say user with username as the user dot get username, right? The user object that we have fetched. Then we have the password as user dot get password, and role with user dot get role, right? And then I'll say build, and I'll return this object. So this is how our user details object would be returned, right? And all all the security part, all the all the validations that the user is present in the database or not, if the password is correct or not, is the role correct or not. So all these would be taken care by Spring itself if we are dealing with the user details object. We are not writing our own login functionality. So this was my custom user details, right? So this will help me in the login part, right? So now you can see that we have written very minimum code and we have almost done with our application. Now we have to write our config part, right? So let me create a class where we will be writing our Spring security config. So let me say security config. So my class would be security config, and first thing first, I have to mark this as configuration, and also I have to enable the security or enable web security, right? So now web security is enabled, right? So what we have to do here is, first we need an object of our custom user details, as we'll be passing that custom user details object to our filter chain method to create the bean of user details and to auto assign the responsibility to Spring to help us in the login of the user, right? By validation and everything to help our application to login, right? First, what we will do, we will have to have a private final custom user details object, right? Custom user details, and we will be doing the constructor injection. So let me say security config, and I'll be passing the object of custom user details, right? And let me assign it, right? So this is my constructor injection done, right? Now we need to write a bean, right? So a bean of filter chain. So let me say public security filter chain, and I'll say security filter chain, and we have to pass the HTTP security object HTTP, right? So in the security part, we have to write the calls that would be governed by what rules of security you are writing, right? Many a times we have discussed this method. So let's start by simply writing this. So I'll say http dot csrf. We have to use the lambda csrf dot disable, right? And then after disabling the csrf, we have to authenticate our requests, right? Now we have to authorize our request. So I'll say authorize http request, and I'll say request dot request matcher, right? Request matcher, we have to pass the request that would be permitted without any validation, and that page would be displayed to the user, right? In the process there would be validations, but to display the page to the user there are no validations. So let me say register, and there would be another call called a /login. User can directly land on these pages, right? So I'll say dot permit all, right? Any other request, I'll say any request dot authenticate, right? Any other request other than this we need to authenticate, right? So any other request other than this we have to authenticate, right? So now we'll say that other than these requests, so we have to define the form login, right? So I'll say form login, and I'll remove this and I'll take this to the next line. I'll take this to the next line and I'll say form dot login. Say login process URL. So our process URL would be login only, right? And default success URL would be, I'll design a page of welcome, right? That would be like a dashboard, and this is true for all the requests, and we'll say permit all, right? And then we have to define the logout, right? So this is, I'll say logout, right? Logout I'll say logout process. It's a logout success URL. So when the logout is successful, we'll say that take the user to login, right? And we'll say permit all, right? So all our requests are being governed now, right? Whatever authentication authorization we require on our URLs, it has been defined. Now I need to define a user details bean. So I'll say user details and I'll pass the custom user details, right? So now I have to do http.build and I'll return this http build object, right? So now what it is asking me to add a throws declaration. So I've added the throws declaration. So this is my filter chain bean, right? So this is how my filter chain bean looks like. So we have said that the CSRF is disabled and other authorization requests we have passed the authentications, right? So this is a basic security that every time you have to write when you are designing a register login application, right? So now with that we also require a bean of password encoder, right? So you might have seen we have to have a password encoder. So we say password encoder, and we'll return new bcrypt we'll say new bcrypt password encoder. So here we are using the bcrypt password encoder. So this is how my security file looks like, right? So this is how my security file looks like. So it contains the basic security that we have to write for every application that we are designing for registration and login, right? So now let's go to the controller part and let me define a controller for our application. So let me say auth controller. So we'll have some sorry, I have to rename this. I have to rename. I'll say auth controller, right? So my auth controller is this. I have to define this by saying @controller, right? So I'll have to say @controller, and now we will define a get mapping, which will be /register, which will be returning a string, and it will be like return a register page, right? So I'll pass a register. I'll create HTMLs with this name, right? And then we have the post mapping, right? Let me say post mapping, and that too with register, right? And it would be like, so in this we'll say that it will be returning a string only, and we'll say register user, and in this we have to have request params, and we'll be passing string username, right? And string password, right? And with this, as we defined a method in the user service, we have to auto wire our user service. So I'll say private user service, and user service, I'll create a user service object, and then we need to call this user service dot, we have a method called as register user, and we have passed the username and password. And when this is successful, we have to return, and we have to say redirect to slash login, right? So redirect to slash login, and then we have to have a get mapping of slash login, right? And we'll say public string login, and sorry, we have to return a page of login. So we'll say login, right? And then we also have a mapping of welcome, right? As you saw in the security file, we wrote a mapping of welcome as well. So here also I have to define a method, I have to return a page. So I'll say welcome, and in this method I'll return I'll return a welcome page, right? So now what we have to do is, our controller part is done, our Java files are done. What I need to add is, we have to have the HTMLs, right? So let me go to template, and let me define a file called as register.html. So I'll put my HTML, registration HTML, which is accepting username and password, and it is going to register slash register calling, right? So now I have to define a new file, that is login.html. So this is my login.html, which is again accepting the username and password and helping us to login, right? And let me define another HTML, that is welcome.html. So this is my welcome.html, which is saying welcome to the app, right? So this is my code part done. So let me go to the application.properties to add some application.properties, right? To add some properties to our application. So these are my application.properties. I have defined a URL. We have a schema of slash login. We have the username, password, and ddl.auto as update, show SQL true, and the dialect of mysql, right? So we are done with the code part. Let me now go to the database and define a schema. So let me say create schema login, right? I have to run this, and I have the schema, right? We have the schema. So let me set it as default schema, and now if I go to my main class and run the application, my table should get generated. Let me go to the main class and let me generate the code. So you can see that my table is being created by the query, right? So if I go to the database and let me refresh the database, let me refresh it, and we can see that we have our user table. So if I go to the mapping, if I now go to the browser, and if I go to my mapping of localhost 8080, and if I say slash register, so it should take me to the registration page, right? So this is my basic registration page. I'll input my email ID, and I'll input my password as 12345, and let me say register. So it will be taking me to the login page, right? So if I say, so we registered the user, so let me go and see. So our user has been registered, but we have been redirected to the default login page of Spring. So let me check once what is the problem. In the form login, we have the login process URL, then we have the default success URL. Okay, so there is a problem. We have to also define our login page. So I haven't defined the login page URL, so I have to also define the login page URL first, /login, and then we have to say login page process URL, right? So that is why a default login page of Springboard was showing us when we registered to our application, right? So let me again drop and let me start my application again. So my application is started. So let me go on the login page. So yes, now this is my default login page. You can say that this is not a good looking page, but yes, this is my default login page and my user is already there in my database. So I'll use this credentials to login. So let me use my email ID and let me enter the password as 12345 and let me say login. So yes, it has taken me to the welcome page. Welcome to the app. So let me do the logout and I'm back on my login page. So this was it from this video. In this video we have learned the simplest and the easiest way with the minimum code that we can write to design a user register and login application using Spring Boot and Spring Security. So this was it from this video. Hope that you people like, share and comment on this video, and if new to the channel, please subscribe and press the bell icon. Hope to see you in the next video. Till then, happy learning.